All right, so let's say you have oriented yourself, but not perfectly because you're full of mistakes and errors. So then what do you do? Because you have to fix those errors, but you still have to be oriented. And this is why I started to get interested in the phenomena of meaning as a phenomenological experience, to experience something as meaningful. It's not exactly obvious what that means, to experience something as meaningful. I think that you can approach it obliquely, you know, like if I said, watch yourself for 2 weeks and notice when you're doing something that you regard as meaningful. I could say, well, here's some markers. You lose a sense of time, you lose a sense of vulnerability, you're deeply engaged in it. It seems worth the effort, right? You forget yourself while you're doing it. Maybe you forget your existential concerns while you're doing it. You're not ruminating or obsessing about the meaning of your life, right? So there's markers for it. It's like the flow states that Csikszentmihalyi described. And then you can experience it, under certain sort of ritualistic conditions. You might experience it when you go see a great movie. You might experience it when you listen to music. I think music is a very, very standard pathway for people to have that kind of experience, because virtually everyone gets intimations of meaning from music. And I think music is hierarchically structured patterns that are representative of being laying itself out properly. It's something like that. So it's an abstract representation of proper being. And so we can grapple with the phenomena of music, and we can box, or phenomena of meaning, we can box it in a little bit and start to conceptualize it. We can start to conceptualize it perhaps as the manifestation of a deep instinct. And so I would say, well, meaning is what manifests itself when you've oriented yourself properly, and when you've optimized the flow of information between you and chaos. That might be the right way of thinking about it. Because you think about a piece of music, is you want it to be predictable, but you don't want it to be perfectly predictable. You want it to be predictable with some interesting variations, and predictable with some variations that make sense. And maybe you can conceptualize that as something like this. It's like, it's predictable at this order of stability, but it's varying down here from time to time. And so you've got stability there, but variability there, and you can handle that. So you want an overarching structure of stability with some internal variability. And maybe that's the way that you update yourself without falling apart. And then I would say you can find the pathway to the optimal rate of update by relying on your sense of meaning. That's what it's for. What it tells you is that you're wandering your way through the world between the catastrophes of chaos and the catastrophes of order, and now and then you swing into the proper locale. You're where you should be. And what happens is you get engaged by that. You get meaningfully engaged by that. And it's fragile. It'll move on you, right? Because it's very difficult to exist at that point constantly. Your bad habits, all sorts of things, your situation, there's all sorts of things that are going to interfere with that. But that doesn't mean that that isn't where you should be. And so then you might say, well, that's where you should strive to be all the time. And then the question might be, well, what would it be like if you were there all the time? And I think that's where intimations of paradise come from. I mean, when I think it was Wordsworth talked about intimations of immortality in childhood, people tend to romanticize their childhood because of the sense of intense engagement that goes along with being a child. And it's one of the wonderful things about being around children, actually. They pay you for their care. And the way that children pay you for their care is that they turn normal things into magic again when you're around them, because you've seen it 100 times before. And so when you see it, you don't see it. You see what you already know. But when a child sees it, they don't, because they don't know. They see it, and then when you watch them see it, you see it too. And so it's tremendous fun leading a small child around to do things that you've done before, because they're so, they're like this. They're like all the time, and maybe that's too much, and they cry and they get upset and all of that, but a good part of the time it's just wild-eyed wonder, and then you can see the world through their eyes, and it's payment. And so that sense of being engaged like that is something that people love about children, and rightly so. But it's also a marker to the proper way of being. You know, there's a dictum in this is a Jungian idea, that there's no difference between the archetype of the wise old man and the archetype of the child. They're the same thing. Because the wise old man is the person who found what he had in childhood but lost. Right? That's a very powerful motif, is that the purpose of maturation is to return to the state of childhood as a mature being. Not to stay in the state of childhood. That's Peter Pan. But to make the sacrifices necessary for maturation and then return. So, well, how do you do that? Well, you do that in part by noting what it is that's meaningful for you to engage in. I would say it's your nervous system reporting to you. Right hemisphere and left hemisphere balanced. The balance between chaos and order produces an output that says you are in the right place. It's a perception. The meaning is a perception of being in the right place. It's the genuine thing. However, because it can be pathologized, that's the thing, and that's why I think there's a call to virtue in most great religious traditions. If you're going to rely on your sense of meaning to orient you, you have to play a straight game, because otherwise you warp and twist the inputs, and then the mechanism won't function properly. You know, it's like if you've blinded yourself to half the world, you can't use your perceptions to orient yourself properly, because the half of the world that you're ignoring is going to pop up at you unexpectedly and take you down. And so if your relationship with the world isn't pristine, honest primarily, then you can't rely on your own internal orienting mechanisms. And then you either fall into chaos, which is an absolute catastrophe, or you have to rely on some kind of external authority. And that makes you prone to possession by tyrannical ideologies, for example, which give you that sense of meaning that you should in fact have as a consequence of your own action. What should you be aiming for in your life? And I can tell you that, roughly speaking. If you're looking for something that will give your life meaning, that's actually quite straightforward as far as I've been able to tell. And this is where the nihilists have it so wrong that it's almost unbelievable. And as far as I'm concerned, fundamentally they're just escaping from responsibility anyways. Even though they have perfectly rational arguments for their nihilism. It's like, everything's meaningless. It's like, no, first of all, no. Pain is not meaningless. You're never going to meet anyone who will ever tell you that their own pain is meaningless. So we can just forego the whole meaningless argument right off the bat. It's like there may be no positive meaning in life. We could have a discussion about that. But self-evident negative meaning exists, and everyone knows it. And even someone who's anarchic and nihilistic to the core, you know, if you drive a spike through their hand, they're going to act like that has meaning. And since I'm an existentialist, yes. And look at how people act instead of what they say. Then they'll act out the idea that that has meaning very, very rapidly. So we'll just go with that. Now, you might say, well, there's all sorts of suffering, and that's self-evident. But that's not the kind of meaning that I believe doesn't exist. I believe that only positive meaning doesn't exist, which is, you know, a little on the negative side, I would say, to begin with. But I can understand it. People can have pretty dreadful lives, you know. And you can easily get yourself in a situation where it seems like there's nothing at all to your life except suffering. And that's what happens to people who become suicidal, for example. And it's no joke. And they have their reasons, man. You know, sometimes those people have been hurt in ways that are absolutely unimaginable. And so when they see a horizon that's full of nothing but suffering, you can't just wave that away. But I would say, the first thing we might hypothesize is that since pain is an unalterable fact of meaning, and certainly seems to be negative, that one of the things you might want to try to orient yourself in relationship to is the reduction of human suffering. You know, because I think that's an important goal. And, you know, the answer to what do you do about a child who's suffering in a concentration camp isn't who the hell's going to care in a million years, right? That's not the right answer. And if it's not the right answer in that situation, then perhaps it's not the right answer at all. And the right answer to who the hell's going to care anyways in a million years is why in the world would you frame the statement that idiotically? I mean, anybody, this is kind of a trick of the imagination in some sense, anybody who's quick-witted can come up with a frame of reference that makes anything, that makes almost anything lack meaning within that frame of reference. Well, all that means to me is that you picked a stupid frame of reference, right? Why should you accept without doubt the consequence of your stupid algorithm? Who's going to care in a million years? Yeah, God. Really? You got to be able to do better than that if that's how you're going to wipe out meaning. Well, so what do you want for meaning? All right, reduce suffering.
That'd be a good one. You could devote your life to that. And I would say, start locally. And I think this is the alternative to right-wing nationalism, which is too much order, and left-wing chaos, which is too much chaos. We don't want to go down that rabbit hole again, either of them. So what's the alternative? I thought about this for a very long time. It took me decades to come to this conclusion. The conclusion is that you straighten yourself out, and you do that humbly. There's this idea in the New Testament, which I get quite a kick out of, that you're not supposed to pray in public. It's a little more complicated than that, actually. You're not supposed to pray in public until you've sorted out the dispute that you had with your brother, for example. I really like that idea, because what it means is that you shouldn't make a public display of your virtue until you've straightened up your damn life. And this is one of the things I really don't like about protests. And I really don't like the fact that university students are taught by their half-witted professors that the way that you change the world